I ask you now that you please prepare to join me in our loving kindness meditation. So I invite you now to just become comfortable in your chair, just allowing the seat to support you. Just begin to sit with a relaxed but a straight posture, relaxing the shoulders. Just allowing your hands to rest comfortably in your lap and gently closing your eyes if you haven't already. Just beginning to settle into the awareness of the body and the breath. Beginning to feel into the body and just noticing what's here right now in this present moment. Connecting to the breath as we relax and go even deeper into this moment of meditation. And as we move deeper into this practice, we begin to cultivate loving kindness. Noticing that we all have within us this natural capacity for loving kindness. This amazing capacity for friendship that is unconditional, that is open, that is gentle and supportive. And we acknowledge that loving kindness as a natural opening of a compassionate heart, both to ourselves and to others. Affirming that it is our wish for everyone to be happy. And now I invite you to know that developing loving kindness begins with developing that tenderness and that love toward ourselves, allowing our hearts to open with love and tenderness. Allow yourself now to remember and to open to all the good that you are. Remembering those times when you've been both kind and generous. as we prepare to enter into our moment of silence, I invite you to experience this love, to notice how it feels in your body. Maybe you feel warmth or a heat on your face. Maybe you find yourself smiling or feeling a sense of expansiveness. This is loving kindness. It is a natural feeling that is not only accessible to each and every one of us, but is each and every one of us. So I invite you as we enter into the silence to rest with this feeling of open and unconditional love as we enter into the silence. And as you begin to bring your awareness back to this present moment, I invite you to continue to bask in this energy of loving kindness. Breathing it in and breathing it out. Inviting feelings of peace and acceptance. And I invite you to now extend words of loving kindness to yourself by silently repeating the following. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be held in loving kindness. May I feel connected and calm. May I accept myself just as I am. May I be happy. May I know the natural joy of being alive. And now I invite you to open this circle of loving kindness by bringing to mind someone that is dear to you. Perhaps it's a pet, a family member, a friend. I invite you to extend those feelings of compassion and loving kindness to them by silently repeating the following. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel my love now. May you accept yourself just as you are. May be happy. And may you know the natural joy of being alive. And I invite you to just breathe and to know that we can always go back within to these feelings of loving kindness that's not only in each and every one of us, but is each and every one of us. And we breathe, and we know so it is. And you may open your eyes when you're ready. Namaste. Okay, and I now invite you to join. That was wonderful. All right, so happy Groundhog Day, everybody. Has anybody watched the news this morning? We were watching the live feed, but they kept having technical difficulties. But for those of you who are not aware, the groundhog did not see his shadow. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Well, and I was going to say anyway, I don't know what that means for Wisconsin. I don't know if that means that an early spring will come or not. I was hopeful, especially you look out there today, the sun's shining. Well, I think it's warm now, so maybe I'm starting to adapt a little bit. I didn't even need a coat this morning, so, if I'd been in Texas, I'd have been bundled up, wearing as many layers as I could, but this is like summer now, so I'm very happy. All right, well, the talk is not about the groundhog, although I probably could have done one on shadows and stuff, but maybe next time. But anyway. So I wanted to start by talking, kind of what made me start to think about this talk was the month of February is our season of nonviolence. And it actually extends into April, but we've got Lent coming up and Easter within that time. So I really wanted to spend this month kind of delving into the season of nonviolence and what that can mean for us and how we can probably practice a little bit more of that and cultivate a little bit more of that into our own lives. So a song that came to mind with me was probably one that many people in here are familiar with, but Michael Jackson. Now, he once sang a song that many are familiar with, and it's called Man in the Mirror. And in that song, he states, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. And no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make that change. And I have to say that's very powerful. I admittedly kind of wanted to sing that, which that wouldn't be good, me trying to mimic Michael Jackson. But of course he said man, but he was referring to himself. But of course this stands for all of us. Men, women, everybody. It stands for all of us. And that's like I was saying, this month is a special month because one, it kicks off the season of nonviolence. But this month is also special because it is Black History Month. It's a time when we honor those who came before us, in both in nonviolence and Black history. Those that sometimes even gave their own lives to make this world a better place for themselves at the time and for generations to come, for us and for those after us. And I want to honor those people here today as well. I want to name just a few names just in honor. So if we could just kind of sit quietly and maybe just close our eyes as I name each one of these people that made the world a better place through their actions or their teachings or just being who they were. Rosa Parks, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Harriet Tubman, John Mercer Langston, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, William Still, Maya Angelou. And you may open your eyes when we're ready, or when you're ready. And of course, we honor all of those that I didn't name as well, because each and every one of them that made a difference has helped us to where we are today, into having the freedoms that we have today. And I've sometimes tried to imagine what our world would be like if even just one of those beautiful souls had kept silent, had allowed fear to prevent them from living their truth. History in present day might likely be very different than what it is right now. And to me, it shows the difference that just one person can make. But it also goes way beyond just that. Far too often, we're judged for what we do for money, by our gender, by our economic status, our sexual orientations, our gender identities, the color of our skin, and our birthplace of origin. So it made me go within, and I began to ask myself some questions. How do I choose to look beyond those things that we see as physical with each other? To look beyond those things and look somebody else in the eye and see beyond that, beyond this physical body or the clothes that somebody's wearing or the country that they were born. How do I look beyond those barriers that make us appear to be separate from each other? How do I look at another person as if I'm looking in a mirror, removing any physical barriers and instead seeing myself? Do I even choose to look in the mirror? And how do I, as Michael Jackson stated, start with the person in the mirror? Now I wanted to read a passage out of one of our books, Gems of Wisdom, and these are from this has a bunch of essays in it, and it's from Black Leaders of New Thought. And it was a publication that's been printed by Unity, and there are some in our bookstore if you would like to grab one of these. But I wanted to read a poem that someone wrote, and it's a little bit longer than things that I normally read here, but I just ask you to just sit with it and just listen to the words. It's titled Look in the Mirror, and it's by Tracy Brown. I see traces of you in my ancestry tree. Everywhere that I go, you are right there with me. But when you look around, as you go about town, do you recognize yourself in the people all around? Or do you see them as other? Do you see them as threat? Do you fear those that you think do not look like yourself? Do you name them and blame them and build a false fence? Does your self-worth rely on more murder and nonsense? Why cling to the lie that you deserve to sit high when your throne is a pedestal built on stories falsified? The truth is not hidden, yet you refuse to see, as if stubborn ignoring will change history. In this world we've created, there is violence and doubt. There is little respect. You block others out. You make your world smaller, believing it's safer, but you lie to yourself, and lies morph into hatred. Look in the mirror. Who do you see? When you look in the mirror, does your reflection look like me? Can you see the shared history? Do you claim the shared destiny? Do your eyes reveal my soul, or only an enemy? Are you willing to change, or would that just be too strange? Is it too much to expect that you would demonstrate respect, or acknowledge all life is birthed by the same midwife? What now do we do to create a breakthrough? For the time has arrived when you absolutely must choose. What team will you join? Who are you willing to abuse? Can you stand by and watch Children starved, caged, and shot? Can you pretend not to care? Will you heal your blind spot? Become more aware. Be willing to dare. Don't stay quiet and safe until you've waited too late. And find the ones you most love experiencing the very same fate. Look in the mirror. Who do you see? When you look in the mirror, does your reflection look like me? Oh, this is very powerful. That one just struck me right here. So thinking about nonviolence and all, it made me think about times growing up in Texas and growing up in the South. Now, it wasn't always easy, and it came with a lot of its challenges. Many of those challenges being enmeshed in old ways of thinking that weren't necessarily always right, and sometimes treated people a little bit differently and sometimes quite unfairly. And most of these instances were based on something physical, something that was very much based in the physical world. And I'm sure it's not just Texas. I'm sure other places experience very similar things, but Texas is just my experience, so I kind of wanted to share that here. Now, I grew up in a town in West Texas, and you may have heard of it years ago. It was Midland, Texas, and our claim to fame is not only all the oil and gas there, but it's where baby Jessica fell in the well. I don't know if you all remember that. Yeah. My dad's a retired police officer now, but he was actually working then, and I remember him coming in for dinner that evening and saying, "Hey, I got to run back to work. A little girl's fallen in a well." It just blows up into this big thing. But Midland, Texas was a very segregated city up until fairly recently, and I'm really not certain that it's changed all that much, that it's really caught up to where it probably should be. But anyway, it was a known fact that if you were white, you lived on one side of town, while people of color lived on others. That's the way Midland was. Nobody questioned it. "Don't go over there after dark," people would warn. "It's not safe." "Well, why?" I would ask. "It's just not," was the reply. There was never any explanation. I didn't understand that underlying reason as a child. It was many years later before I actually did. It was because the people who lived, not on the white side of town, but on the other side of town, had a skin color different than my own. Maybe their economic status was a little bit different than my own. And then the town was segregated even more. It was segregated by the economic status, not just skin color. And I remember an instance in junior high school. Now, I went to the more kind of middle class junior high school. We weren't the most prestigious, the most wealthy. But I remember once when it was our turn to host the more prestigious school for one of our football games. And I'll never forget the looks of disgust on the faces of not the kids that were there to play football, but on the faces of the parents as they sat on our old wooden bleachers. They weren't those new fancy metal ones that they had at the more prestigious school. And as a result, our school, or the people that attended it, or the parents of the kids that attended that school, didn't meet a certain standard. And surely because the parents didn't meet it, well, the kids don't meet that standard either. And then there was high school. Now, I attended and I graduated from Robert E. Lee High School. It's still called that today. But true to its namesake, our school flag was the Confederate flag. That has changed. And our school song was Dixie. And that has also changed. But I remember a special meeting being called during my senior year of high school because one brave person decided it was time to speak out. She decided it was time to speak out about the hurt that the flag in that song caused for just reasons. And her speaking out helped others to begin to find their voices as well. And before long, a special meeting was called. Now, I remember I attended that meeting, and I remember the looks of anger and hate on the faces of the people who found those voices unwelcome and unwanted. Why are you speaking out? It's always been this way. That's just the way that it is. And that meeting ultimately almost erupted into violence because before long, people started yelling. I remember people standing up to yell, fingers started being pointed. And before long, they started ejecting those people that were causing this disquiet and this discontent from the meeting. But it became really frightening. And why? Why was that? It's because of something that people perceive as different that separates us from other people. Something that people point and say, well, that's different than my own. You're different than me. Your skin's a different color. You were born in a different country. You don't wear the same types of clothes that I do. And as a result, what you have to say is not important. What you have to say has little value to me, therefore it does not matter. And it's not just with colors of skin or gender or anything else. Sometimes it's just because somebody has a different opinion than our own. Sometimes it's because, like I mentioned before, somebody wears clothes from a different store. Somebody drives a different car or lives in a different neighborhood, a different style of house, believes differently when it comes to religion or to spirituality. Again, those things that we think separate us, but do they really? What if we were to instead learn to look at each other as if we are looking into a mirror? If I were to look at you or you or you and see not you, but see myself looking back at me, do you think it might be a start to lessening the amount of violence we have in the world? Do you think that might be a start? In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl states, love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self, or you could say her. It was written back in a different time. Whether or not he or she is actually present, whether or not he or she is still alive at all, ceases somehow to be of importance. Now, in Ethics for the New Millennium, and this is the book that I'm going to be picking a lot of the material this month, and these are also in the bookstore if you're interested in ordering one of these or reading one of these for yourself as well. But in this book, the Dalai Lama tells us a feeling of closeness toward all others can be developed based on the simple recognition that, just like myself, all wish to be happy and to avoid suffering. So how do we do this? How do we choose to have compassion? And how do we choose to look beyond those perceived barriers? Those things that we only think make us different from each other. Because when we do that, when we begin to look beyond those physical barriers, we also begin to do our part, not to just practice love and peace, but to start to take part in our practice of nonviolence. Now, one of the things the Dalai Lama mentions is to dedicate ourselves to the ideal of compassion. Because when we do this, we begin to ask ourselves a question of how our actions impact the well-beings of others. We take a huge step back when we don't pause to do that. Our outlook on others truly begins to change when we learn to practice and appreciate compassion. Now, I'm saying anybody's got to head out here after church today and go join the Peace Corps, or to go and get rid of all of your worldly possessions. That's not what I'm saying. The Peace Corps might be fun. I'll admit that. That's got a certain interest in it. But donating all of your possessions might not make you so happy. It might begin to cause just a little bit of resentment, right? Creating the opposite effect of dedicating ourselves to the ideal of compassion. So let's approach it a little differently and a little bit maybe more in a practical way to learn how we can show compassion just in our daily lives without making any huge changes. Now, one of the ways in which the Dalai Lama speaks, one of the ways in which he speaks of is to rid ourselves of anger. Now, are we ever going to be able to just completely go through the rest of our lives without feeling one little iota of anger? Probably not. But we can learn to approach it from a different perspective. lessening the negative impact it can have and on the violence it can cause if we allow it to do so. So we can start by asking ourselves a question when we're feeling anger. We can stop to ask ourselves, is it of value? Is the anger I am feeling right now or the anger this situation is causing of value? I mean, we know that there are times, and we've seen them in movies or lived them vicariously through motivational speakers and authors, but there are times where anger is of value. Maybe somebody was discouraged by something in life, and they use that anger to just pick them up off the couch and to help propel them out to make a difference. But that's not usually how it goes. It's not how it often goes. It can sometimes result in a screaming match, right? Anger can lead to those types of things, much like what happened at my high school, or even worse. It can lead to senseless violence if we allow it to do so. So we can stop and ask ourselves whether or not our anger is of value to the situation. Oftentimes we will find that it is generally not of value. Now, I've used traffic as an example before, driving in traffic, and believe me, that can cause a great deal of anger in a lot of people. I'm totally innocent in that, by the way. But somebody cuts me off in traffic and I get angry and say I respond in anger. I get angry and I respond in anger. Is it going to change the fact that I was just cut off in traffic? And what's going to happen if I respond to that in anger? Or I hear that people are hurt that my high school is using a flag that people understandably find offensive. So I decide that I'm going to go out and I'm going to respond back to those people in anger. Is that anger going to be of any value in that circumstance? Is it going to make those people feel heard? Is it going to open my mind and allow me to sit there and to hear why they are feeling hurt by that flag or that song? Is it going to allow me to perhaps place myself into their shoes to find out why they're feeling hurt? The answer to that's going to be likely no. Now, the Dalai Lama also mentions the need for discernment. And this one is where I choose to, as the Dalai Lama states, realize that no one truly benefits from causing harm to others, and that whatever immediate advantage might be gained at the expense of someone else is necessarily only temporary. So he talks about how our actions have an impact on both ourselves and others, and how that when we lack discipline, he mentions anxiety arises in our mind, and deep in our heart, we come to feel a sense of disquiet. So I remember, and this is a small example, but I remember when I was about 19 years old or so, I had gotten a credit card. Somebody actually gave me a credit card. And I go out, I'm like, oh, those tires are really nice. I don't need new tires, but I'm going to get them because they're going to make my car look really cool. Probably several clothes, talking about brand name clothes, probably several pairs of brand name clothes that I didn't need at the time. And then you know how it goes. It wasn't free. The bill arrives. And I begrudgingly paid the first two. And then I got to thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, I could use this money towards something fun. Y'all got my new clothes, my new tires. I can just go out and use this towards this money that I'm putting on these bills towards something fun. Why would I want to pay the credit card bill? So I let a couple of months go. And of course, it was showing up on my credit report, but at 19, I was like, whatever. I'll deal with that when I'm old one day. You know, I'm sitting there thinking to myself. But it really started affecting me. It really started affecting me here in my head and in my heart. You know, I knew it wasn't right. And I began to realize, I'm like, okay, I lack the discipline to sit down and pay that bill. And as a result, I began to get really anxious about it. And it ate at me until I sat down and finally paid the money to get caught up. And once I paid it, I immediately felt better. That anxious and that disquiet left. And like I said before, that's a small example compared to others. One example I thought about when I was writing this talk was, I thought about the Westboro Baptist Church. And many of you may have heard of them, but for those of you who haven't, It's a church that's located in Topeka, Kansas. And the founder, Fred Phelps, he has made his transition. But the people of the church are known for picketing funerals. And they picket funerals of LGBT, veterans, and other people that they don't agree with. Now the day, however, arrived when one of their members says, "No more, I've had enough." Megan Phelps Roper, the granddaughter of Fred Phelps, she talks about how she was forced to begin to picket funerals as early as the age of 5. And she would do this alongside of her family. And she tells about how the people in the church would often throw rocks, bodily fluids, or other types of things on those people that were attending those funerals. And one day, however, she said she began to realize that she'd seen and she had experienced enough hate, and she decided to leave the church. And she mentioned, "I ache a little for who we all might have been in the absence of those strange and destructive beliefs. Without them, how much pain would the world have been spared?" And she also talks about the anxiety and the inner conflict and turmoil that the actions of the church caused within herself as well. Not just to other people, but within herself. She said there were days where it felt right to her because that's what she'd been taught as a young child, and she didn't know any different. She was taught that it was good when you make others feel hurt or angry, or when you read negative things about yourself in the newspaper, because she was taught that it meant you were doing something good. But as she got older, she began to not feel so good about those things. She says she began to witness the turmoil that she was causing family members of the funerals that they were picketing. And this began to cause her a great deal of anxiety and grief. She said she began to look into the faces of those family members at those funerals. Those family members who were already experiencing a great deal of pain from just having lost someone that they loved. And it began to bother her, and it began to stick with her. She began to experience that disquiet. The Dalai Lama mentions it's because any advantage we receive over someone else's expense is only temporary. But why else might she or anybody else feel this way? It's because what we do to each other, we also do to ourselves, looking in the mirror. Now, the fifth of the Unity 5 principles tells us that knowing and understanding truth is one thing, but living it is where the rubber meets the road. In the Bible, Matthew 25, 35 through 36, and verse 40 states, "I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Just as you did it to one of the least of these who were members of my family, you also did it to me." And how do we know we're living it? First, we won't suffer from things such as anxiety and disquiet. We won't feel these types of things within. We will instead feel good inside, feel good within. And we can also ask ourselves the following questions. Do I affirm divine intelligence and love in this situation? Do I remember my own divinity and that of others involved? Do I take responsibility for attracting the situation into my experience and know that its outcome for me will match any thoughts and feelings about it? Have I aligned myself with God or the divine, whatever name you use for it, the universe, the good, and received guidance before I act? Now, I've said it once and I will say it again. I don't believe we were ever meant to merely exist just beside each other in this human journey. We were meant to see each other as so much more than those things that keep us separate. We were meant to see and acknowledge each other as our brothers and sisters, but also as a part of ourselves. To look into the eyes of another person and to see myself staring back at me. So today I choose. I choose to go beyond and to see beyond those illusions that make us appear to be separate. I choose to see beyond skin color, gender, economic status, age, physical ability, gender identity, sexual orientation, and so much more. I choose to look beyond those things, and instead, I choose to see you. I choose to see you. And I choose to see you when I look in the mirror. I choose to see your pain as my pain. I choose to see your happiness as my happiness. I choose to both be and to see love. Today, I choose. Namaste.